Thank you, Mr. President, and members of this body. Amendment number 5 is a fairly simple and a fairly straightforward amendment. It simply deletes section 16 of HB87, and it deletes section 16 in its entirety. The reason why amendment number 5 is important is because I remember, and we all should remember, a time back in our history where it wasn't that long ago where vigilante groups, militia groups, and I apologize to the senator from the 30th if vigilante and militia is too strong of a word to use, but when they routinely rounded up citizens just to exact their own form of vigilante justice. These groups, some would describe as hate groups, was formed with the explicit purpose of hunting down people of color. And I believe that Georgia, and I believe this deliberative body is much better than to go back in the dark days of our nation's history, and not just our nation's history, but our state's history, by bringing forth legislation in Section 16 that would allow those same type groups to form, and not only allow those same type groups to form, but those same type groups to exact the same kind of justice by using the Attorney General's office. This section simply turns neighbor against neighbor, because if you read the code section in section 16, it talks about public agencies or employees, political subdivisions. It talks about residents of his state who are also registered voters. And what this section would do, quite simply, is turn people of color in this state against people of color in this state. It turns communities against communities, and I believe this section has the unintended consequence, really the unintended consequence of allowing and empowering a segment of the citizenry of this state with powers that no other legislation that we've passed in this body before has given to them. And that should be of a major, major concern to anyone that supports this particular legislation. Section 16 simply gives entirely too much power to citizens and residents of this state that are also registered voters, as mentioned on line 630 of this Senate substitute, that simply allows them, without any provocation whatsoever, just a pure suspicion that someone in their community, in their path, in their travels, may be an illegal alien, which allows them to start an action with the Attorney General's office. If this action is not contrary to families, I certainly don't know what it would be. If this action isn't contrary to communities and building that beloved and even a perfect union in this state, I don't know what would be. And I believe very, very strongly that we as a state has grown way past those dark, dark ages. And we don't need to look too far in history. In other parts of this globe where similar citizenry have had the same type power, where members of their own community has been rounded up, and in the extreme cases, some have even been exterminated. I certainly would hope that we would have the foresight and the forethought in this body to see that there are problems, and in Section 16 is very, very problematic as it pertains to protecting the citizens of this state, as it pertains to our families, and certainly as it pertains to our communities. We are a much better state than this. And Mr. President, if there are no questions, then I would yield the well and ask that you consider what this section could do to our state, how it could divide this state. And I'd also implore you and ask for your support in my amendment number 5 in deleting section 16 in HB87 in its entirety.
One question, Senator. Senator from the 5th is recognized for a question.
Will the senator yield?
Yes, I will.
Is it not true, Senator, that Section A confers essentially the right to make this complaint on any essentially public employee or public official?
That is correct, Senator.
And is it not true that around this state a great many public employees are in fact not U.S. citizens? They're legal permanent residents, refugees, or people that have been granted political asylum?
That is correct, Senator.
And therefore those folks would not be eligible to register to vote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would the gentleman further yield?
Yes, I will.
Is it not also true that there are public employees around this state who are likely not who are citizens but who are likely not registered to vote?
Absolutely, Senator.
And is it not true also that in Section B, the only private citizens authorized to file a complaint under Section 16 are registered voters?
That is correct, Senator.
Is it not true that this is the only section in the entire code that requires someone to be a registered voter in order to make a complaint about the violation of a law?
That is correct, Senator. And that's the only section that I've seen in HB 87 where that would apply.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Yes, I will.
Is it not true that by requiring someone to register to vote before complaining to the Attorney General about the violation of a law, you're essentially violating a U.S. citizen who's not a registered voter's right to redress? In other words, the right under the Constitution to petition the government for a redress of grievances here is taken away from anyone who doesn't register to vote but is a citizen.
Senator, I certainly appreciate your comment, and I agree with you. I respect your legal opinion and the fact that you are a constitutional attorney and has knowledge in this particular area, and if you say it, then it must be so.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Given that that's a violation of the redress clause of the Constitution, is it also further not true that by treating different citizens differently and by treating different people differently, whether they be permanent residents, lawfully present here, or citizens of the United States, regardless of whether they have exercised their voluntary right to register to vote, that they're essentially setting up two situations, a situation where this section violates 28 U.S.C. 1985 and 1988, which are parts of the Civil Rights Act as amended?
Senator, I certainly agree with you, and I know that you know of which you speak, and I hope the members of this body will hear those comments that you just shared and recognize that there are some constitutionality issues regarding this section and how it's going to impact the citizenry of this great state.
Would the gentleman further yield?
Yes, I will.
So given that this violates the Civil Rights Act, it violates the redress clause of the Constitution under virtually even the lightest of standards, which is the rational basis test, is having this in the bill going to create more unnecessary litigation defending something that's patently unconstitutional?
Senator, you certainly know what you speak, and I feel as you do that having this in this legislation, and I know there's others from the other side that have some experience with the legal system, they would have to understand that there will be continued and strong constitutional challenges to this particular section of this law, of this particular bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
No further questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the